But this gentleman is an international designer. He has 4 studios all across the world. He's worked in 23 different countries. And he's been in private practice for the last 15 years. So without further ado, please welcome Abhay Wadhwa. Abhay?
Thank you. So good morning, all. Thank you to the College of Syntonic Optometry for inviting me. It's truly an honor. Thank you, Larry, for reaching out and getting me here. I was, when the invitation first came to speak here, I was a little puzzled because I wasn't quite sure if I'll be able to speak to non-architects, non-lighting designers, because that's my background. I'm an architect by training. I've been practicing lighting design for a couple of decades now, and as I researched further, I mean, the first question I asked Larry when I met him at ILA in Vienna was, what is Syntonic? You know, and of course, as the journey started, the inquiry started, I was very happy to be invited and honored to be here. I've been here 2 days, sitting in parts of 102, and of course, a fabulous day yesterday organized by Hans and team. And as the process kind of continued of inquiry into what you do as healers and as professionals who practice in this field, I was fascinated by the potential of including this within mainstream architecture, the research that exists, and see how we can actually get it into spaces. So hopefully, I'm here all day today. Hopefully, as the conversation continues after this talk, we can discuss that further. So I want to start with just giving you a brief preamble to what I'm talking about. It's in the handout as well. I'm focusing on shadows and darkness. I'm a lighting designer. My company is called AWA Lighting Designers, but I talk about darkness and shadows. So you can clearly see some of the responses. Wait, your company's name is Lighting Design, but you do darkness design? How does that work? And there are many poetic interpretations of how we could, make that connect, but the big one came for me when I was sitting in on Ray's talk on the 102 class, where he says that 2 electrons in the same spin, same direction, are forbidden, in quantum physics. We know that, right? So in lighting, why is it that shadows and darkness, which is the other spin, if the light's going this way, shadows and darkness are complementing it. Why is it that shadows and darkness have been pushed out of our zeitgeist, of our reality? We don't want to talk about shadows and darkness. We think it's a bad thing. And I will show you historic precedents of how this whole process came about. But all of you can hear me okay, right?
Yes.
Great. So do you want to keep it Q&A as we go, interactive, or do you want to wait till the end?
It's your call.
I'm comfortable either way.
Just keep it for clarification during the talk, then afterwards you can ask elaborate questions.
I think that's a good idea. And if any of you don't follow my accent, just put your hand up and I'll slow it down. Right? That happens with me sometimes. I get excited and then people don't understand what I'm saying. Great. So the first slide here is from an artist called James Turrell, his work. And he says that one of the things in architecture is that generally people are making forms and not space. People make space by making forms and stick the lights in. It is rarely done in the way that light activates the space and makes it alive. Right? And yesterday when we were at Falling Water, we saw a great example of, making a beautiful space. Form followed, but first FLW was making space, right? And he was using those 4 materials that were highlighted, and light was one of them. You saw the coves, you saw the details behind the seating, and it was quite compelling. So the outline for the talk today, we have 5 chapters, if you would. I'm a big fan of Tarantino movies, so I like to work with chapters. I don't know how many of you have seen Kill Bill series, chapter 1? Yeah. So first we'll start with definitions, because we're all from slightly different backgrounds. Well, I'm from a slightly different background. Let me rephrase that. So I just want to make sure that we're all on the same page. Then we'll talk about symbolisms, underpinnings, interpretations, and then I'm going to show you a few of my projects done internationally on where we've used shadows and darkness to try to provide a healthy, holistic response. Those of you who are wondering about shadows and darkness being, legally a problematic issue, I've been in practice 15 years. We haven't been sued yet. And we've been called in many times to be expert counsels on why somebody tripped and fell. But the point I'm making is that it's not, if you start looking at light levels and light as just the answer to everything, then the only definition you have for me standing on the stage is that I'm a 200-pound man. Right? If you just talk about light levels, there's nothing else to me. So you're taking away all the intricacies of this beautiful medium called light. So first, in definitions, what is darkness? What is shadow? I refer to darkness as the absence of light, and shadow is the comparative darkness, which happens from blocking of light. So let's talk about the history of light levels. Please keep reminding yourself of the question, how did shadows and darkness become a bad thing? Oh, you know what? I'm sorry, I had to turn this on for my office, and I forgot to turn it on. Pardon me. Right, so keep reminding yourself that the conversation is that somewhere along the line, shadows and darkness became a bad thing. So let's look at the history of light levels first. How did we get to where we are? We a couple of hundred years ago, we had the, we were using kerosene and coal, and then we kind of went towards, we reached our commercial fluorescent lamps in 1938. That's why I asked the question yesterday that the lighting that was there at Falling Water was all fluorescent. And the lady responded, and it was built in 1933 and then 1939, but the fluorescents became commercially available in 1938. Her answer was that the Kaufmans owned this great store, so they could afford to get the new technology in, which is fascinating. But then in 1993, Dr. Shuji Nakamura of UC Berkeley came up with the white LED. Now, the LEDs have been around for a long time. We were using it for the small flashlights in the 60s. But once Dr. Nakamura came up with the white LED, he won the Nobel Prize for it 2 years back. The world changed. The world changed. And we will talk about, if any of you have questions about the effects of LEDs as it stands, that's a separate class that I teach for the AIA, that's American Institute of Architects. But I can definitely talk to you about it in terms of what's happening with the giant field of LEDs. So that's the history of the lamps, if you would, the bulbs. So what happened in, looking at the history, what happened in the 50s? We were told more light, better sight. If you wanted to work better, you went closer to the light. I have an architect friend of mine, he's in his 70s. He says, when we were younger, we would, if we wanted to study harder, we would raise our desk towards the ceiling light so that we were closer to the light. That he would just actually elevate the desk on platforms. And at that time, the light levels required were 1,000 lux. That's metric lux, but in the United States, that would be 100-foot candles. That's a whole lot of light. This is in the 50s, right? Then the OPEC crisis hit us in 1973, circa. And there was a re-examination of the required light levels in work environments and spaces. And they just almost ad hoc said, well, you know what, we really don't need 1,000. So we can do with 500. So suddenly, because of obviously energy concerns and energy costs, it went from 100-foot candles to 50-foot candles. So by a factor of 2, it basically came down to half the light level that you were working with. And the same set of eyes, the same target audience. It's not that you move from the United States to sub-Saharan Africa where they, maybe it's a different physiological set of eyes. It was the same target audience. So when I was doing my research, I said, well, okay, we understand there was an energy crisis, but why did we go with 100-foot candles and then to 50? And then another 12 years later, in the mid-80s, the IES North America, which is the Illuminating Engineering Society of North America, said you don't really need 50 either. You really need 30. So, and I'm talking about a regular office environment. So the big question then is that you went from 100 to 30 in 30 years, right? How is that possible? So the question is, who was actually selling the light levels? You guys will relate to this very quickly because I have no problems being on camera and talking about how ridiculous the big pharma companies are. But for us, it was the energy companies, the lamp manufacturers, who wanted to sell more light. They wanted to sell more light. They wanted to sell more energy, and then when it became expensive, they said, you don't need it. Cut it down to half. Let's cut it down more. So that's when my process started. And in 2008, there's a friend of mine, Murray White, in Toronto. He's a reporter. He said some judicious use of shadow would help humanize our overlit lives. Yeah. So how did all this happen? And I'm going to illustrate this with what I call, with the Gartner hype cycle. Do you guys know do all of you know who Gartner was? Okay. So basically, the y-axis is the technology trigger, and the x-axis is time. So anytime there's a technology trigger, or there is a happening, it goes straight to a peak of inflated expectations. Then you come crashing down into a trough of disillusionment. You work through a slope of enlightenment, and you get to a plateau of productivity. It's not very different than, meeting a girl, and oh, she's amazing, and then you find more things, and then you work your way out or not, and and you reach a plateau of understanding each other. That's what happened with light levels. That's what happened with LEDs. That's what's happening with LEDs, is that the minute we could buy light inexpensively, you were seeing inflated light levels. And because I work internationally, in the Far East and Asia, I saw the trend when the money came to the Middle East and to South Asia, everybody wanted more light. That's what they wanted. They were getting these big CFLs, which were this big, They didn't care about glare and other things, but that's another conversation. So what we say is that the Gartner hype cycle reinterpreted in terms of light levels is that it's a wave. It's in time. That it comes with different stimuli, right? And it's influenced by culture, climate, craft, skill, scale, architecture, budgets, right? So there are all these rings. These are like big beach balls, or gym balls that are riding the Gartner hype cycle. It's a wave, right? And where you are in your interpretation of light levels as a society is connected to, our theory, is connected to where you are in economic development. You know, this is a very contentious statement that I just made, so I'm happy to have questions on it later. So let's move to, we're still in definitions. Color connotations, black, darkness, is that okay? Yeah? Gray, shadows. This is kind of like the Lucier scale that Larry and Ray referred to. That gray, shadow, and white as light. Anybody want pink for shadows or yellow for light? Okay. So color mixing, sure all of you, I mean that's what you work with, so I'm just going to jump through this from additive and subtractive mixing to symbolisms. So the connotations of white light, right, is that it aids in form of mental clarity, encourages us to create clutter and obstacles, spiritually evokes purification of thoughts or actions, and possibly enables fresh beginnings, yeah? Clean plate, you know, white canvas. Gray, psychologically unsettled or uncomfortable, it's always expectant of change. That is, it's in a state of transition, right? And there's, of course, the German description of gray, which is Eigengrau, which is the color seen by the eye in perfect darkness. Yeah? And because contrast is more important to the visual system than absolute brightness. That's an important point, yeah? That absolute brightness by itself, you know, it doesn't really help us. What about black? Feeling inconspicuous, restful emptiness, mysterious feeling, and black implies weight. That is, people will think a black box is always heavier than a white one. You know, there have been tests that have been done, and black box always is chosen as, oh yeah, that's got to be heavier. So let's talk about symbolisms. In white is a traditional color worn by brides in the Western world and Japan. White for truce. The Japanese have 6 distinct terms to define whiteness. And the Greeks, the ancient Greeks, wore white to bed to ensure pleasant dreams. What are the negative symbolisms of white? White is the color of mourning in India, China, and Africa. That if somebody passes away, you don't wear black, you wear white. And it was the custom for the queens of France as well to wear deuil blanc, which is white mourning. What about gray? Neutrality, wisdom and intelligence, and the unknown or the possibility. The brain, for example, is referred to as the gray matter. Also, on the negative side would be an unhappy mood or to be caught between 2 differing viewpoints, right? The positive symbolisms of black. In the Maasai tribes of Kenya and Tanzania, the black color is associated with rain clouds, so therefore a symbol of life and prosperity. You know, the Native Americans, the Hopis, several tribes associate black with the life-giving soil. The Hindu deity Krishna is a giver of strength and peace. You know, basically means the black one or the dark one. And even in the Judeo-Christian world, the Cathars viewed black as a color of perfection. What's the negative symbolism of black? Black is a symbol of mourning in Western societies, right? And that an old wives' tale may be that a woman buried in color black will come back and haunt her family. So there are these connects with, you know, on one side of the world, it's white is the color of mourning, and on the other side, black is the color of mourning. So, and that's the criticism of color symbolism is that, you know, we can't really say that one color or one shade of white or black is going to work the world over, you know, because there are different people on this planet, there are different cultures on this planet, there are different backgrounds. So moving on to, any questions so far? No? Okay. On to a couple of underpinnings and inspirations on darkness and shadows. Let's start with, I mean, I'm sure all of you have read in part the work of this gentleman. Yeah? So he was one of the biggest expander of, I guess, in my opinion, of an understanding on what human darkness was. Right? So he said everyone carries a shadow, and the less it is embodied in the individual's conscious life, the blacker and denser it is. In spite of its function as a reservoir for human darkness, or perhaps because of it, the shadow is the seat of creativity. So the immediate connection whenever I show this to architects is like you have this aha moment. It's like, okay, that's why I get why I'm so screwed up, you know? Because creative people have that potential to connect with, the darkness as a seat of creativity, according to Jungian philosophy at least. And the shadow self is to confront a person with his shadows to show him his own light. Once one has experienced a few times what it is like to stand judgingly between the opposites, one begins to understand what is meant by the self. Anyone who perceives his shadow and his light simultaneously sees himself from two sides. So in the spiritual world, that would be called being a spectator to life. Yeah. So then one of my favorite authors is Junichiro Tanizaki. He's in the 1800s and then wrote this in the early 1900s. He said, this is the parlance of that time, so you have to excuse some of the words. We Orientals tend to seek our satisfactions in whatever surroundings we happen to find ourselves, to content ourselves with things as they are, and so darkness causes us no discontent. We resign ourselves to it as inevitable. If light is scarce, then light is scarce. We will immerse ourselves in the darkness and there discover its own particular beauty. But the progressive Westerner is determined always to better his lot. From candle to oil lamp to gaslight, gaslight to electric light, his quest for a brighter light never ceases. He spares no pains to eradicate even the minutest shadow. Right? And then he takes it further in a comparison with ghosts. And he says, yet so far as I know, the West has never been disposed to delight in shadows. Japanese ghosts have traditionally had no feet. Western ghosts have feet but are transparent. You know, so as even the Streifel suggests, pitch darkness has always occupied our fantasies, while in the West, even ghosts are as clear as glass. Right? Then Sophocles, of course, human being is only breath and shadow, just doing a few, reviews of literature. And Shakespeare, life is but a walking shadow. And then to Murray White, the reporter from Toronto Star in 2008, in the same article he wrote, in the face of our heavily technologized convenience culture, darkness has lost its malevolent heft, demoted to a manageable annoyance. And then he says some judicious use of shadow would help humanize our overlit lives. So we're coming a full circle here, right? That in the 30s, according to Junichiro Tanizaki, where industrialization and production of light bulbs and conquering darkness, conquering space, we must, the way we kind of get in and take over is by light, So now we fast forward 70, 80 years, and in the Western world, I do it in quotes because, it's really, in the information age, there are no Western and Eastern worlds, I think. But anyways, that we are now talking about reducing light levels. We are talking about that the darker it is, the more, shadows that we have, the more high-end it is, the sexier it is, And we're coming to that realization. So if you have, make a comparison. Go into a restaurant, and if it's dimly lit, you know the dishes are expensive, and right, and it's sexier, right? if it's a bright restaurant, you're not really, I mean, you're looking at it as a diner or you're looking at it as a food court. So, you know, that's the comparison in, say, New York, which is where I live, you know, and that's what I see. You know, the tighter you're packed and the darker it is, the higher the tab, right? And the more spread out you are, the brighter the lights. You're in the suburbs, you're probably in Yonkers, and you know, and it's not the city. Now, you take that to the other side of the world, you know, 20, 30 years back, you're traveling through Asia, and if it's dark, no good, right? I mean, I remember I did a project in Hong Kong in, what was it, 2002, I think, where the client it was a fancy shoe store, and the client said, "Why didn't you give me enough light?" I'm like, "What do you mean?" He said, "This is not enough light." I said, "Your shoes are almost $1,000 each. What is enough light for you?" He said, "Well, I want this to be bright." I said, "You're selling the shoes, not the space." So he didn't pay my invoice because he thought I didn't give him enough light, right? Because your professional worth is really connected to you just providing enough calories or enough light, right? It's not the right kind of light, if you would. So we're talking about the same time, different parts of the world having different requirements for light levels and perceptions, right? So that's where shadows and darkness, more than light, become the criticality of architectural discourse, yeah? So moving on to other underpinnings. In Christianity, I mean, there are so many references to light. And, you know, in all the books, I've just taken out two, you know. "For at one time you were darkness, but now you're light in the Lord. Walk as children of light." Right? The light, in the book of John, the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it, you know. So the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. So you can start seeing connects maybe as we go in this journey, that darkness, shadows, maybe not a good thing if you're religious, you know. Religious is, again, it's a very broad term, so I'm going to quickly move on. So you go into the Vedic philosophy, you know, which is pre-Hindu scriptures. They make the spiritual poetic connection between knowledge and light with the Vedic mantra, which is tamasoma jyotirgamaya, you know, which is take me away from the darkness into the light. That means if you want me to be aware and awakened and knowledgeable, then I can't really be in darkness, you know. And in Sufism, which is a sect of Islam, it says nothingness, darkness, is essential to the ability to attain enlightenment. So you can see that there are different schools of thought around the world spiritually, and the Sufis embrace emptiness and darkness. That's a big part of it. The yin and yang, well, this is, I'm sure all of you are familiar with this. This for us is in some ways to what Ray referred to about the spins, you know. To me, it's the balance between light and darkness, you know. Whether the forces are masculine, feminine, light, dark, you know, these opposing forces, when locked together with a little bit of the other in them, become a healthy environment. In Feng Shui and Vastu is the code of construction from the Vedas, and Feng Shui, of course, is from the Far East, from China. You know, black brings Feng Shui energy or grounding and stability. Black absorbs energy, soft light creates positive energy, etc. So there are references of light and shadow and color, and especially in the white, black, gray, in many, many different ancient scriptures and books. Of course, Plato's allegory of the cave, you know, talking about ignorance and talking about perceptions. I'm sure most of you are familiar with the allegory of the cave, right? They're tied to the stone, to the rocks, and the light projects, and that's the reality. Their shadows is the reality that they see. Then a couple of them escape, come back enlightened, and try to explain the shadows because their reality has changed, and they are then seen as the crazy ones, right? Again, working with light, dark, and shadow, yeah? So moving into, how are we doing on time?
Good.
Real good, okay. Maybe I should slow it down a bit because...
No, there's a lot of questions.
Okay, we'll keep it for discussion then. Super. So in interpretations, we are going to go through art, film, and architecture and product design. So first in art, right, talking about Caravaggio's work. With Caravaggio, light isolates. He's referring to Caravaggio's work in tenebrism, yeah? It creates neither space nor atmosphere. Darkness in his pictures is something negative. Darkness is where light is not, paints it in black, right? And it is for this reason that light strikes upon his figures and objects as upon solid, impenetrable forms and does not dissolve them, as happens in the work of Titian, Tintoretto, and Rembrandt, right? So, two schools of thought with light in art is tenebrism, which would be Caravaggio's work, as you see in the background. He paints in the black, and the figures emerge from the black, right? Or chiaroscuro, which is the other school, which is chiara scuro, Italian light dark. That it's more that you're starting with a white background and then painting in. Yeah. Moving on to James Turrell. How many of you are familiar with the work of James Turrell? Okay, he's now 86. He's done a big installation in Utah called the Wadhwa crater. He's been working on it for the last 45 years, but he's a big exponent of using color in spaces to create evocative spaces with no healing or health connects, but spatial connects. So these images that you see are from Rice University, but he's done, you saw the first image on the presentation, which was at the Guggenheim in New York, when he did the big installation in the center. And he works with chroma, and he was one of the first people to work with color-changing LEDs for spatial, not flash trash as we call it, not just blinking color-changing lights, but to actually use it in space. That's the Rice University space. And I mean, I visited, just like yesterday was a pilgrimage of sorts to Falling Water. I visited this in Houston, this project, the Rice University project. And it's super compelling in terms of how the chroma and how the view of the horizon and the sky kind of flows. Another of Turrell's project. Dan Flavin worked again with light and shadow in using, if you've been to Dia Beacon out north of New York City, you would see a lot of his installations using just old T16, which are the fat fluorescents. Remember those fat fluorescents? Right, that's in the 70s, yeah? He was using those to create space. So he's not going in and making a form and then sticking things in, right? He's actually creating space with this material, which is fat fluorescence. Then Shigeo Fukuda, as an artist, uses trash and garbage and junk to kind of make with light and shadow amazing pieces which only come alive when the light hits it by shadow. So what seems like what's that pile of garbage doing in the corner turns into what you see on the screen, with just putting the light on and relying on shadows, right? Larry Kagan, American artist, he does that too, using shadows to, and light to kind of morph your perception of things. In film, of course, we have the film noir and the low-key lighting. We'll talk about that. Film noir is basically defined by suspenseful shadows, and it's associated with low-key black and white visual style. Does anyone know what this movie is in the background? Sorry? The Good German. Yeah. Was German expressionist cinematography, so I thought I'll use The Good German, which I thought was a great example of it. But it could be Casablanca too, yeah. Low-key lighting, another aspect of working in architecture and film, to create a chiaroscuro effect. And then let's look at the work of a few architects. Tadao Ando is a Japanese architect, and he says it is necessary to return to the point where the interplay of light and dark reveals forms, and in this way to bring richness back into architectural space. Yet the richness and depth of darkness has disappeared from our consciousness, and the subtle nuances that light and darkness engender, their spatial resonance, these are almost forgotten. Today, when all is cast in homogeneous light, I'm committed to pursuing the interrelationship of light and darkness. Light whose beauty within darkness is as of jewels that one might cup in one's hands. Light that hollowing out darkness and piercing our bodies blows life into place. Right? So, I mean, when you read his poetry, he wrote this in the early 2000s. He's a very famous Japanese architect, one of the big five, famous five from Japan. And the spatial resonance that he refers to becomes compelling when you see his spaces, including the church that he's done, and that's the image in the background, And he says, in my opinion, the darkness creates the opportunity to think and contemplate. And in my 40 years as an architect, I've been looking for my own matrix of space, which in my imagination is an obscure place like a cave surrounded by thick, heavy walls of earth, or a space of darkness, lit with only a dim ray of light. Now, some of you may say that, well, this is not possible in the United States. Well, see, Tadao Ando works internationally. It's not just a Japanese architect. His principles that kind of jump out in his architecture are never diluted by the legal requirements of path of egress, light levels, etc. Some of you may know about this, that you need to have a certain amount of foot candles along your path of egress as you exit the building in case of fire. That's an NFPA requirement. But the point is, if your driver is light, that I need to get the light in first, then you're going to have flavorless or soulless spaces, because you're really relying on, like I was saying, describing me as a 200-pound man. And that's it. That's all you need to know about me. So you say, I'm going to put 2 foot candles along the path of egress, and that's it. So we kind of lose the plot if we don't look at the other aspect of it, which is darkness and shadow. And it's not a scary thing, is what he's saying. Peter Zumthor, to me, buildings can have a beautiful silence that I associate with attributes such as composure, self-evidence, durability, presence, and integrity, and with warmth and seriousness as well. A building that is being itself, being a building, not representing anything, just being. And in that, in this quote, if you look at his work, Google his work in terms of more images, you will see that he's actually talking about composure, warmth, sensuousness. All of that is connected to the way he engages with light and darkness. Becomes more clear in this image, right? It's not uniform. It's not about uniformity. It's about really picking up the textures and the material and, creating space. Jean Nouvel, French architect, another example of, using light and shadow. That's a real project. That's not a rendering. And of course, Corbusier, where, whether it's around Champ or other projects that he's done around the world, projects in Chandigarh, that the light, the way he utilized light completely changed the space with movement over time through the course of the day. In product design, some cute examples. This is the shadow chair, other fixtures which create, use light and shadow to create patterns within architecture. And then moving on to project showcase. And I'm going to talk to you about some experiences of over 6 projects. And if you have questions, please stop me. This is a project in Bushwick, in Williamsburg, Brooklyn. I live in Brooklyn. This is about half a mile from where I am. And this project is for the Parks Department. How many of you are familiar with the Parks and Recreation? Not the TV show, but yeah? Yeah? Great. So it's very difficult to work with a public agency and talk to them about darkness. You can imagine that, right? So I'm going to show you the images here. Now, here's where the perception part comes in. That if you're creating a rhythm, as we did with this stitch that you see of the ramp kind of going up, and your edges are lit, edges of the space. So this is a big visitor center and a park. And if the edges are lit and you create the sense of geometry where there's visual clarity of space, then the perception part is handled very quickly. Then it leaves you with calculations and paperwork that you need to do for them, to show that you're meeting all the light levels. But if you see in the far corner, on the right corner of the project, it's not as wavy as it looks because clearly it's a screen, yeah? You go into that corner, it doesn't have light. It doesn't have a light fixture dedicated to that area, and when
in the screen there's a light on the corner. So is that
I'm talking about above,
or is that behind it?
Oh, that's behind it. That's a street light. It's Brooklyn, so everything is pretty close. That's actually across the street, right? So, but if you look at the green grass, yeah, going to that corner, there's no light there. There's no light there. And the architect said, Abhay, you sure it's going to be fine? So, we showed them how it conforms to the light levels because it's really a small requirement of 1-foot candle. But I can't be hijacked by 1-foot candle, in changing the complexion of the project. And I said, that's the make-out corner. That's where couples are going to go and make out, Let it be dark, So, I don't know. Well, I don't know if that sold it for him or not, but... yeah, so it's really how you interpret standards, right? If you let it hijack you and say, well, you know what, I really got to make sure that nobody trips. Well, first of all, you can't trip there. There is no level change. It's a sloping lawn, So it's really understanding the rules of the game so that you can create evocative spaces with darkness. This is a project that we did at the United Nations Plaza in New York City. It's called the Arc of Return. It was the memorial for the abolition of slavery. a very important project, small project, important project. That's the project. You can see Queens and Long Island City in the background. And the project for us was, when working with the artist, the sculptor, was not about, what I called a science museum, because it has a lot of information on the inside, the ships that they came in on, the things that happened, etc. I said, it's not a science museum where you point lights and say, look, this is the name of the ship, look, another light here, another light here. It's really about creating an evocative experience so that people who are walking through it are touched by it, so that, art and light and darkness together are creating a space which is making you emotional, making you think, giving you a brief respite in your day to ponder about bigger issues, bigger questions. And if you look at the project, this is obviously a black and white shot, but if you look at the project, there is the only light that we have is on the inside. There's really no other light outside. And it's a big United Nations plaza, so you must have seen this, it's that big plaza, that the pencil building on the right side and the Secretariat, and so it's right at the end of that plaza. This is at the Kennedy Center in DC. It's called the Monsoon Club. It was a temporary install for about a year. How many of you have experienced the monsoon or a typhoon or real serious rain? Hurricane, but like serious rain, not winds, just rain, right? So the monsoon, if any of you have experienced the monsoon or a typhoon, say if you're in Hong Kong or if you're in Bombay, the rain comes at you horizontally, because it's so heavy. And what we wanted to do was create an installation where we could actually create an immersive environment with color and material and darkness, and shadows, so that you actually felt like you were in the middle of a big monsoon storm. So what you see up in the ceiling is actually not fabric, it's string, yarn. That is, let me see if I can get to the next slide, like that. So each one of them is string that's cut to different lengths. We modeled this in Pro E in a software, and then we had 10 interns working for about 2 months. You got to love the interns, snipping the yarn to the right length, and the lights are actually behind the yarn. So that's the yarn, the string, and circular ring. So imagine a 2x2 tile in the ceiling, which is replaced by this. So there's this full ceiling grid, which is taken out and replaced by this. And then the lights were added behind it in a chroma that would be, reminiscent of a blue, purple, what's that in your codes? Epsilon? No. Epsilon, omega, like that. So, and the idea was that you were doing epsilon, omega, but you were cycling it, and it was mixing with the fabrics. So as a space, it wasn't just light. It was light with the material, with this geometry. You're sitting in it, and we thought it was fairly successful. These are the shots that you get above. So if you experience rain, this is what I wanted to achieve with the light, what's coming through it. This is what's the Kennedy Center? No, it's these are fire rated fiber string. Yarn was 2-hour rated, yeah. 2-hour rated, yeah. And that's a great question, though. This is another project. It's a live music venue with a restaurant. It was supposed to come in Spider-Man 5. I don't know if have you reached 5 yet in Spider-Man? Okay. It's 3, 4, whatever. So it was supposed to come in the next one. And here we were trying to create an organic space where these pods were actually backlit with LEDs. and they were chroma controlled to basically, you could change it by the day, by the hour, by the minute, or by the show, And each one of them is individually controlled, but as you can see, there is ample darkness in the space. But you could also do white, And the trick here was that there are step lights which are at every level change. So if you have that, then it kind of takes care of a lot of circulation issues, yeah. This is another project called the Tote, and where the inspiration was looking at the foliage and coming up with lighting for these trees. First we had this black tube that you entered through, kind of a essay on birth, if you would. And when we were designing it, the owner said, but how are you going to light black? I don't want to do black, and that's where the big question is, what kind of black? Because black is, at least in architectural world, it's not just, are you talking about a flat black paint? Are you talking about granite? And this was actually a granite terrazzo finish with chips of white. So it worked out very effectively as a reflective, spackle, as you can see in the image. And that's the project. This is all done in Pro E, but the big thing here was biophilia, in that we were trying to mimic the light that comes through rain trees, when you're looking up at it, and the openings within the foliage that give you the light beyond. Yeah. Another project. This is actually in the in India. It's in Bangalore, which is it's like the Silicon Valley out there. And this is the World Trade Center there. It's a 45-acre site where we were utilizing principles of color and circadian rhythms and darkness and shadows for a big township. So like they say, the proof is in the pudding. This is a project which has 16 residential towers. So you can imagine the number of kids, and in that part of the world, everybody has 2 or 3, right? So a lot of kids running around, and kids, light levels, level change, falling, hurting, all of those other concerns come into play, and the idea here was that you create a township which is not overly lit, so that it looks like a public park, but it's more intimate, creates moments of interaction, becomes a catalyst for community. People gather around light. So your light is making the space, right? And so it's not about just taking a form and sticking lights in it, but actually working out what the visual hierarchy is. How are you going to get people to cluster together under the big rain tree that you see here? How are you going to get them to cluster together? So we created a ring of lights down there, and we actually lit it from up there with a moonlight, what we call a moonlight. So the moonlight actually has it's the nanometers for the light was about 460, and we were shooting a very sharp beam of light from 45 floors up straight through the rain tree, creating a moonlight dappling effect on the seating below it. But if you looked at absolute light levels, somebody told me, this is done with a firm out of New York, HOK, big architectural firm. Somebody said, you could not do this in the United States. I'm like, that is not true. Because everything that we did here, because it's a New York-based firm called HOK, I could not just do things because there's another part of the world. So, hey, who's going to catch me? It's, right? Because in this world, you can't do that anymore. It's not, everything is connected. HOK, New York, the interior designers from Singapore, we are from New York, then the client is Silicon Valley and Bangalore, and it's all of these like mix of people who are all connected. We are working on WebEx in different time zones, so you can't really say, well, it's a different part of the world. That worked 20 years ago. You could say, forget that country. I mean, you know, who cares about there, right? No, it's actually surprisingly very similar to you know, how you have to build here. We can get away with very little in breaking the, you know, not following the NFPA code. So all of this is LEED rated. You know, it's a LEED Gold project. It's the whole 45 acres of this, which includes a hospital, a hotel, a 1.4 million square foot mall that you see in front of you. You know, that big wall there. 16 residential towers on this side, a clubhouse, a school. All of this is stitched together in a healthy mix of light and darkness, right?
What are LEED requirements for lighting? Is there a specific requirement?
Yes, there is. If you follow the USGBC, you have 2 points that are clearly impacted: the SS8 and there's another one. The SS8 is the big one. SS8 is the one about light trespass and light pollution. And trespass being that you're not going to hurt the neighbors, and pollute that you're not going to spend more than a certain amount of light to escape out into the sky. So the sky glow is reduced, you know. So night skies, dark nights, etc. Right. So let me see if there are more images. Yeah, there are more images of this, right? So the idea was that we don't need to have just light poles put everywhere, as long as the edges are defined. I mean, these are wayfinding techniques of making sure that people understand, you know, the extents of the site. Using color, you know, especially when it came to under that big tree that you see in the middle. You know, the lights are between the T and E. You know, they're located there and they're kind of going straight down. Created a beautiful kind of focal point to the space, and then it was a case of expanding layers here, you know, and using light as a catalyst for community. So you had this area, which was a dancing fountain, and you know, it became so popular that they had to put, you know, the big velvet rope that they put at nightclubs. So you wait outside in line. This is what they ended up doing here, so that people are not walking in here. But we lit this as a box, you know, so the perception is, the visual perception is very clear. Yeah, that's the view of it from above the World Trade Center. And another shot at sunset. You know, so you would see that there are moments that, you know, are created. This is the water here, that's the tree, you know, and of creating, but you see what could be perceived as darkness. Of course, part of it is the aperture setting, but it's really not as bright here, you know. But it's one of the more successful projects that we have done in that part of the world. Very well received. Right, so 1 hour, that's all. That's what I have for you. Thank you very much for listening. Most of you were awake, I see. So thank you.
First, I want to compliment you on two things. One, taking the time to get to know us and spending time with us, and then weaving that into a presentation.
Thank you.
As well as taking our event yesterday.
Yes, that was great. Yeah.
Yeah. So I really appreciate that.
Sure.
That's a unique quality. So it showed an awareness of us, and that we're not the same profession, but yet try to share the same thing. So we
Thank you, Hans.
Maybe one question. John.
Yes, John.
So take over. In an office setting, for instance, say our waiting rooms. Should we have lighting from above as well as on the walls? What is just a general way to? What's the general looking at where patients come in and out?
Okay, to repeat the question, John is asking, how should we light our waiting rooms? Reception. Strobe lights?
Yes, exactly. I was going to say strobe lights and a mirror ball. Maybe a fog machine. Yeah, exactly, disco ball. It's a very good question. And I can't give you a standard pill I say, hey, this is the prescriptive way of doing waiting rooms. But I'm talking about feelings here, right?
Yeah.
I go into a space and I want to feel, that, like we're doing many hospitals in the United States, and the biggest thing that we talk about, in the health and wellness part of our practice is how do you make people feel comfortable, calm them down, right? And we are doing a children's hospital in New Orleans where we are actually using chroma through a backlit Barisol ceiling. Barisol is a very thin, it's like the stocking material is very thin and white, and you can actually backlight it. Barisol, Barisol, or Newmat, Newmat, both manufacturers of this material. And you can backlight it, and what we are doing is we are creating moments for the children so they could be sitting there waiting and suddenly they'll see a cloud that'll go past them, And it's like enough of a distraction, anything that's moving in color is enough of a distraction for them to forget about, maybe their real worries. So depending on your target audience, maybe it's not a cloud, maybe it's something else, We've also found that, how would you light it? I would, holistically, looking at all the elements, we love to light water. Water is an amazing calming element in your reception area, and let it dapple up into the ceiling. So you put the lights at the, in a little waterfall, and the lights are at the bottom, and it catches the dappling, and then it, collects on the ceiling, and the whole space is filled with it, besides the sound of water, Those are some of the ideas. I'm not a big fan of color changing, just for the sake of color changing. That's very, that's what I call flash trash. It's, it's not going to last. You're going to get bored of it. It's either going to break down. So there's no intelligence to it. It's just basically you connect it, put something on your computer saying, hey, play this color. It's very easy to do. It just doesn't respond to the heft of, why they're there and how do you actually make them feel calmer. Just calmer, I thought I had till 10 o'clock. Wait, I thought I had till 10 o'clock.
Did I? Am I off? 8:30 to 10, you're right.
Oh, good. Whew. I was hurrying it up because we thought we were going to do questions, so, yeah.
Yes, go ahead.
Yes. Thanks, Hans.
Talk about the LED and the fluorescent as far as, do you know anything about how it affects health-wise?
Sure, of course, yeah. Absolutely. Fluorescence, by itself, there are a couple of issues to it, that you have the color, right? You have the rendering, how people look. But the biggest issue would be what the harmonics are coming out of the driver, the ballast for the fluorescent. The same thing actually applies to the LEDs, to the LEDs, to LEDs or LEDs, that what is the driver that's being used and what kind of harmonics is it creating. That's the part of the conversation that nobody wants to touch right now. The other thing that goes into, a healthy LED is the wiring. If the conduiting that's going to the wire, to the fixtures or to the driver doesn't have a sheathing on it, right? It's creating electromagnetic fields which are not good for your health. There is also the issue of color of the LED. That
At what distance does that electromagnetic radiation?
it depends on the driver. I couldn't give you just saying, hey, stay 5 feet away and you'll be fine. It depends on the driver. And the distance issue is that it's actually with the fixture. So, if you're remoting it, you're putting it in a remote location, makes it better for sure because it's kind of somewhere. But then access for maintenance becomes a nightmare. So the likelihood of you actually remoting a driver is low. because it's just not practical. So to the color issue that, and I know that there was a reference to this yesterday maybe, where they spoke about, I think, Larry, it was you who was talking about Deborah, who spoke at ILA? Yes. Yeah. So she's one of the people. We are also very involved in this, that, yes, LEDs are going to be 75% of the market by 2020, right? That's a given. You can't stop that juggernaut. The part that you can be careful of are these color issues, the harmonics issues, the wiring issues, etc. Right? The safest thing to do is to not dim an LED from harmonics standpoint, right? But you can't really do much if you're not dimming an LED or color changing it or tweaking the chroma, right? The color of the LED, because it's a blue chip with a InGaN chip with a white phosphor, you're not getting the full spectrum, So what we have been experimenting with for the Children's Hospital, which is why I'm really honored and fortunate to be with professionals like you, because I want to talk about how we get this into mainstream. And one of the things is Classrooms, yes, and don't use the RGB. There is an LED out there which is using the 7 colors, 8 colors of the rainbow. The pastels, the Roy G. Webb, whatever you call it, right?
Should we use an RGB because you can change it then?
No, what I'm saying is you can use an RGB. You can definitely use it for color changing, but the spectrum that comes out of an RGB has to be examined. Now, not every RGB LED chip is the same. What I'm saying is that in order to work with your mu's and your epsilons and your alphas and your omegas and all your, the colors, your syntonic colors, maybe the 8-color LED, 7-8 color LED, which is very new. It's mostly in Broadway. They use it for Broadway shows. Broadway doesn't use RGB. Broadway uses the 7-8 color LED, right? Because you can get much richer colors and different colors. You can get a beautiful purple, like the color of Rasmus's shirt color, that kind of, or your pink, and you can't do that with RGB as much.
What do you think about LEDs that are white but can be changed? You can control them to go from 2700 to...
The dynamic white, it's called? Yeah.
I'm looking, just personally, I'm redoing my kitchen at the moment, and I'm putting LED tape around underneath the cabinetry. I want to make it go from 2700 to 6000 so I can control it at different times of the day.
And why, does everyone follow why she's doing that? The whole circadian stimulus conversation? Everybody knows about that, right? Sorry?
2700 is warm, like more yellow, and the 6000
is cool.
It's like more like sunlight?
Well, no, sunlight actually, that's a misnomer. Sunlight is actually can go 12,000, 15,000, 20,000. Yeah, sunlight, daylight, depends on how we define daylight. Is it clear disk, occluded disk, clear sky, etc. But to your question, yes, I'm aware. That's what I do for a living, yes. Yes. Yeah, I'm just trying to make sure that everybody's on the same page here. But the technology she's referring to is called a dynamic white. It's not a static white. And you can get it from 1600K to 4000K or 2700K to 6500K. Now, it's basically a black body radiator technology. The color temperature is that as you heat black iron, it goes from red hot to yellow hot to white hot to blue hot, right? So the hotter the temperature, the bluer the light, or the whiter the light. So if you're at 27 to 6000, the reason you would do that is there is from a very famous school in Troy, New York, there is this whole conversation about circadian stimulus and how do you use the CS to balance your sleep cycles, especially in residential lighting. So the conversation there is that you would boost yourself with white light, cool white light in the morning, and then you would take it to the red and the orange at night, right? So you would warm it down at night and boost it up. Now, what do I think of it? I think that's only part of the story. You know, when do you get the light that you say if you want the circadian stimulus, which part of your body cycle are you infusing with that light? So, because it's not a straight line that you just don't go awake to sleep, right? You eat in the middle, you have blood sugars, your dips 2 hours after you eat, you're going to be the sleepiest, right? So can you use the light to boost yourself at that time? We use that in another presentation, not in Shadows and Darkness. We use that to work in call centers. You know, the 24/7 call centers, there's no light and they're sleepy at 2 in the morning, which they should be sleepy, but they're working from 9 at night to 9 in the morning. At 2 in the morning, they are sleepy because they had their lunch at midnight. So what do? So we boost them with a specific wavelength for a specific time, you know. So in general, it's a good idea to have cool white in the morning and warm white at night. But the true value of it is to understand where and when. So we are working on a system where it actually ties into your body cycle. Yeah. Yes.
A number of years ago, we had a speaker, Arthur Zion's Catching the Light. I don't know if you've ever seen his book.
The Israeli guy. Is it?
That's kind of...
No, I haven't seen
Arthur
this.
Zion's. It's called Catching the Light, The Entwined History of Light and Mind. And he talks a lot about light and shadow. At the end of our conference, he said to us, where you got to pay attention the most is where light and darkness meet. At the edge of light and darkness, there's a whole world that would apply. And I thought maybe you might comment on that concept because I've never truly understood it. But it's a very intriguing idea.
Yes, thank you for sharing that with me, Larry. I feel that that threshold, right, which is the threshold of your contrast, that's where the contrast starts, is the supercritical element, whether it's a hard threshold or a soft threshold. If it's a hard threshold, then it's serving one kind of a function, you know, that is creating hard edges, it's creating boundaries, maybe, right? If it's a soft threshold, then maybe it's a transition that goes from the light to the dark. It all ties back to what I believe is the essence of this conversation, which is contrast engineering. You know, it's not light design, it's not light engineering, it's contrast. That's what your mind, your brain is seeing. It's not seeing light. You know, you can give me 1,000-foot candles here. Put me in a vacuum, don't give me a window, put me in a room and ask me how much light is there. I'll say there's a lot, you know, but I won't be able to tell you if it's 1,000 or 100 or 10,000. You know, if I don't have cues which give me the contrast. You know, if my brain is not informed by something else, light as an absolute number is nonsensical. So that's where the whole conversation of foot candles, I call foot candles the dirty F word because, you know, it's, you know, it really doesn't do much for us, you know. But 95%, I don't have accurate numbers, but a big percentage of my profession only talks about foot candles, you know. So being here and having these kind of conversation is really, for me, it's very exciting in that we could mainstream what, you know, you guys do every day into my profession, which is in architecture and lighting, and understanding darkness, shadows, you know, as being a healthy way to light a space, but then mixing it with all the healing properties that come with, you know, your filters that I've been hearing about in 1 or 2. So, yeah.
So, you know, one of the things we measure with all of our most of our patients is contrast sensitivity. So we have tests for that, and we hope to change that perception. But the reduction of that perception is a reflection of certain kinds of pathology, dysfunction. So something we pay attention to like on a daily basis.
Fantastic. Fantastic. Yes, Ray. I'll be right there. Yes. Yeah.
Just talking about edges and darkness in between.
Yeah.
So you haven't mentioned Goethe.
Say that again?
You haven't mentioned Goethe? Goethe, the German philosopher from the...
I'm sorry, I didn't, you're right. You're right. You're absolutely right. That's a very, very relevant part to this conversation, but I had to choose. Yeah.
So I have two other questions. One is, you already have an LED fixture, say, in the kitchen where they're working all the time underneath your cabinets. So we're getting this problem with the wires coming through it. How can we shield it?
Sheathing. You can get sheathing for the wire. Now, sheathing. Sheath. Not to be confused with a sheet, but sheath. SHEATH. Armored cable, sheathing cable. There is technology available that can sheath or cover the wire. Sheath. Shh. Yeah. Stop sheathing me, yeah? And then the other thing is, Ray, that's part of the story. The other is the connectors that go into the fixture. So if you take a Gaussian meter, right, and you put it there, that's the culprit. You know? The wiring is creating harmonics if you don't take care of it. If it's unshielded wire, you are going to get harmonics. Your Gaussian reading is going to go up. But the big issue is where the interchange happens. Again, it's the threshold. It's where the interchange happens with the plug going into the fixture. You know, so for that you need tight connectors. You know, because you're running low voltage, generally speaking, from the driver. Yeah. I just said a tight connector. I mean, it's just a twist and lock is what it is usually. Yeah. A twist and lock. Twist and lock. Yeah. Yes, Ray.
What about DC?
DC is the best. DC is the best. I mean, for LEDs, it would take care of 99% of the issues that happen with harmonics. You know, if you use DC supply, so you change from AC to DC somewhere, and you just supply DC to all the lights. So, I mean, going back to the Westinghouse, Tesla, Edison fight, you know, if DC had won, you know, LEDs would not have 99% of their harmonics issues. Yes, Ed?
Yeah,
Sorry.
yesterday at the ballgame, you and I were talking about the work of Peter Mendel.
Yeah.
And he is very interested in the color gray.
Yeah.
For him.
Yeah.
With 3 shades of gray, he feels that is deeply into the subconscious.
Yes.
I wonder if you would comment on that.
I attended Peter Mendel's class at ILA in Vienna. I haven't done much research on it. I know about the Eigengrau, which is, you know, the intrinsic gray, but I will look into it. I don't know enough about the 3 grays of Peter Mendel. Yeah. Yes, Peter.
You had brushed on a little thing. The lighting engineers pay more attention to function, foot candles, architects, psychological effect of lighting, color, chroma.
Yes.
Our perspective is more on the biological, physiological aspects of that.
Yes.
Has that penetrated into your industry very much? And if not, is there a way we can bridge and bring it there?
Thank you. Thank you. That's a fantastic question. That's why I'm here. There are a few of us who are very interested in the well-being, the wellness part of it coming into the built environment. You know, there is, as I'm sure several of you are aware, there's a wellness index by Delos, the wellness, you guys have the well-building code, yeah. So, WELL. They're based in New York. They were the first group, to the best of my knowledge. There are many.
I encourage everybody in this room, by the way, to look that up and
Yes.
make your practice
why? Why-
That's a great point.
Say it again.
Well, W-E-L-L, Well Standards. And it's by a company called Delos, D-E-L-O-S. They are the ones who kind of started it and funded it. And then the Clinton Foundation has backed it, and there are a whole lot of other people who are behind it. But here's what they're doing. For the first time, they're actually talking about the human being. You know? So far they were talking about the building construction material, the energy, the air quality, the BTUs, the light pollution, light trespass. But, you know, I mean, so-called environmental aspects were, of course, all respected. But Delos actually has a body, wellness standard has an outline of the human body on each one of their sheets, saying which organs it impacts. You know, so several of us are becoming well professionals in kind of wanting to address it from the wellness standpoint. To answer your question, are there many of us doing this? The biggest topic in the lighting conference that happened in Philly, we're in June, right? May. In May, was health and wellness. But here's where it's kind of not reached the width that we needed to, in that they have only been talking about circadian stimulus and circadian light. Like that's the be all and end all, you know.
It's no nutrition.
That part is not really spoken about, because they're all concerned with how are you going to use the LEDs to handle your sleep patterns, your circadian stimulus, and so on. And that's like a really small part of the whole conversation. Hi.
In 2004, the CIE actually put a statement through in illuminating designing that they needed to take into consideration the biological
Yes.
impact that
Yes, you're absolutely right.
it started, but it hasn't been implemented.
It's not been implemented as much. Well, CIE is Commission International d'Éclairage. They're based in Switzerland, but they are the international lighting body for what we do. And the North American Society is called the Illuminating Engineering Society of North America, IESNA. CIE is the mother organization. They did do that. There is a lot of movement towards it, but it's been hijacked by this. I say hijacked, maybe not in a good way, because it seems like we're only focusing on circadian, you know, and that's a really small part of everything in the lighting system, you know. So, I mean, the where it's going to go is really dependent on, I think, these kind of exchanges, on how do we actually be at the forefront and get the information from, you know, great professionals here into the built environment, you know. So maybe doing a test project together, you know, showing that this can be done. There's, you know, Mount Sinai is doing something, Beth Israel is doing something about, you come into an emergency room and I'm going to put you in blue light. You know, I mean, it doesn't really tell the whole story. So, but I think we can do more with healing and wellness in architecture, using the information and knowledge that you all have, you know, and maybe teaching architects, you know. Lighting designers, as I know it, the industry is kind of stuck in wanting to focus on what pleases the eye from a shape perspective, you know. So basically choosing fixtures and so on and so forth, but not looking at it holistically.
One question. I
Yes.
appreciated your interfacing the culture and the beliefs of the people.
Yes.
And then how that dovetails with manufacturers and how they want to sell.
Yes.
Like in our country, you lower cholesterol standards to increase the sales stack.
Look at all the stuff on the background.
Yes.
But we've had talks on how outside the visible spectrum have health benefits, specifically infrared and UV, and the balance thereof.
Yes.
So is there any talk, because in the industry I understand now, it's considered thermal waste if you have infrared. Because you have heat generation.
Yes, yeah.
So is there any discussion about bringing that back? Probably not.
Not in the mainstream industry. Not in the mainstream industry because it's thermal waste, as you said, and basically you're working with BTUs and kind of handling air conditioning loads, and you don't want the infrared to come back in and all of those things. But that's not from the human being standpoint. Now, if you look at the wellness standard, the well standards by Delos, if you had an innovative idea like that, that is that there's a chip in your LED which comes to the infrared part at specific times based on a time clock, it's very simple. You would get points for innovation because the information that you have, it's good for health.
I like it.
So they're saying that if it's good for health for the human body, for your wellness, that's why the wellness standards, then we will work with you. And I mean, it was very refreshing when they started about 2 years ago, in that they were, for the first time I saw the human body outlined with the chakras shown with, it was really, exactly. So, yes,
So,
sorry.
One of your examples was the TOPE project.
Yes.
And you mentioned the word biophilia, which was really interesting to me because I've never heard it in a room where I'm with my optometric colleagues before.
Okay.
So the idea of biophilic space, lighting, for example, I don't know how others in the room felt, but yesterday, because we were in this room and today, I feel much better than I felt in the room that we were in for the 102 class. I know the 102 class had open windows and it was a small room. I don't know, maybe there's more airflow here. But how do we bring, so that biophilic project that you showed was white trees, but I think it has something to do with green.
And the light that was coming through the leaf patterns, that was basically looking at Hoberman's, principles and analyzing it, But to your question is about how do you actually use biophilia in space?
So I'm interested, this might seem really off the wall to people in
Please.
the room, but I'm interested in algae. And do you know anything about the algae producing lights and also the edible? Within the context of the built structure? That's one question. And the other is, within the context of the living building challenge, which is, I would say the well standard is different. But Pittsburgh, for the third year this fall, will have the International Living Future Institute's products conference here. And I think that you need to be there with the consultation of the brilliant geniuses in this room that have been involved in Syntonics for a long time to come up with products that can then be certified by well and
Yes, and then you can take it out into mainstream architecture and make a case for it that this really helps people.
And we can use it in our homes. And
Yes, absolutely. And I think I will definitely try to be there. But the Living Building Challenge that she's referring to is another great group that they work all over the world and they create living buildings. So it's not, the building is alive and they use that kind of technology. And the biophilia question that she had is really trying to get Mother Nature into your existence, So how do you do that with light and sound and material? That becomes really a fun dialogue that can evolve with the Syntonic College here.
Okay.
Yes.
Any question? Radio audience, thank you.
You have a question?
Thanks to ask the question.
Yes.
Or actually make a comment. In terms of the contrast between the gray areas, what we do when we are in gray is we have a choice to make as to whether we go to the light or whether we dark. And we make that decision based on our emotional state or our physical state. So the aspect of how we deal with contrast and how we deal with gray is an issue not only related to those external to us, but our own
For sure.
how we are directed from our
Uh-huh.
are just more subtle forms, more either guiding you or being guided to either the light or the dark side.
Fantastic.
And so it is a decision process around nervous system, around the biological system, around the spiritual system.
Sure, sure. Well, thank you for sharing that. And to the point from that side of the room.
She said that
Yeah.
gray colors provide an opportunity for the person, the being, in an emotional state to make a choice, and their emotions guide their choice, whether it's work.
It's not just, yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Homeopathically, there are homeopathic remedies that will indicate whether you are actually a gray person here who wants to go to life or the dark system.
Homeopathic remedies will indicate whether you're a gray person or you want to go towards light and darkness. Yeah.
It's like between light and dark.
Right, right. And I mean, the big question is it only your mind that is doing that, or in space, can we use light and dark to create evocative spaces, to help you with which state that you want to be in? I don't know enough about Peter Mendel's grays, so I can't really touch that yet. But thank you for sharing that. But, I'm totally with you that it's connected with your emotions. It's connected with the emotions. It's about how you feel. To John's question, I mean, how should the waiting room how should it be? It's really, how do you want to feel? Connecting with the heart that, the octave that Rasmus spoke about yesterday. It's all connected. Yeah.
Okay, very good.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.